I first started in this museum heritage business, my goodness, getting on for some 60 years ago when I had a job in Pembrokeshire County Museum. And so I got to know this part of the world pretty well. And I'm so excited to be here in North Pembrokeshire, in Nevern, or to give it its correct Welsh name, Nevern, because I'm going to trace just a few of my historic steps. And retracing those footsteps means that I'm visiting one of my favourite churches, St. Brynach. And I have the added bonus today that I'm also meeting one of my friends that I made all those years ago, who actually has a close connection with this place. I am just so delighted to meet Steve Watkins, who's been intimately involved with this church for, must be, well over 60 years. So Steve, what's important about St. Brynach?
This is a very popular church, and the puzzle is, why is it such a large church as this in such a small village? But the answer to that is when the Normans came here in 1089, they intended to make this their manor in the area. And so consequently they built a large church under the castle, which they hardly altered at all, up on the hill. And that's why we've got such a large church here, because the Normans moved out after about 100 years and built the castle in Newport instead, and an even larger church in Newport. So that's the answer as to why St. Brynach is important.
So what do we actually know about St. Brynach, Steve?
What we know about St. Brynach we get principally from the lives of the saints, written about 600 years after he was here. But we know that he was one of that company of people known as Peregrinato Christo, who were monks, principally from Ireland, or by Irish Celtic tribes, who wandered up and down the western seaboard of Europe. And Brynach was one of these. He established churches in Brittany, in Cornwall, here in Wales, in various places in Pembrokeshire, and eventually he died at the town of Braunton, which is a corruption of Brynachston, near Barnstaple in Devon. And there, if you care to go there, you'll find a lot of reminiscence of him in Braunton Church, particularly beautifully carved ends of the pews.
It's obvious this has been an important centre for centuries.
Yes, it gained importance with the advent of the Romans. Up until that time it had been fairly quiet. And of course at the same time was the advent of pilgrimages. Pilgrimages started, they were quite as early as the 8th century, but they really caught on with the millennium, year 1000, because people thought the world was going to come to an end, and they thought they better put their souls right before the world came to an end. So they went on pilgrimages, and once that caught on, of course it was for the good of your soul you went on the pilgrimages, but they actually found out when they were at it was great fun as well. They had a marvellous time. They only got to read Chaucer to realise that. So they gathered in their thousands, and they came here from that starting point of Holywell in the north, through Nevern, on their way to St. David's, where a pilgrimage to St. David's twice was worth one pilgrimage to Rome from Canterbury. And as you look up the hill there, you'll find the cross still carved in the wall as they leave the village, and beyond them something most impressive, which are footprints in the slate 18 inches deep that showed how many thousands of pilgrims did it take to make footprints in slate of 18 inches deep. Thousands upon thousands of them. And they continued, you know, to a greater or lesser degree until the Reformation. Pilgrimages through this village.
So, thinking about what Steve said, and it was just so nice to see him again after so many years. But this is a little bit of my own personal pilgrimage. It's coming to places like this where you know thousands of people have walked in ancient times, and seeing something as very special as this cross that Steve mentioned, the Pilgrim's Cross, carved out of the living rock. So I now want to find those footprints. So these are the steps that Steve mentioned, and I find it difficult to really get an understanding of how many people have walked here to wear out these depressions. And if you pardon the pun, this one has got to be about a foot deep. St. Brynach died on the 7th of April, a day that, according to legend, when the first cuckoo of the season sings while perched upon this cross. And this must be one of the best examples of an early Christian cross in Wales that dates from the 11th century. This is a truly amazing survival, possibly because it's carved the two sections out of very hard Ordovician stone. The experts that have studied this cross have identified a very strong Viking influence in its decoration. The cross was first written about by George Owen, who was born nearby at Henllys in 1552. I think I'd quite like to meet that guy because he seems to be a bit of a character. He did so many things. He was an author, he was a map maker, he was a patron of Welsh bards, he was an antiquarian, and to top it all, he wrote the book A Description of Pembrokeshire in 1603. Evidently, newlyweds would jump onto one horse here, ride off together to their new life. And there's a reference to the bridegroom who commented after his wife tore her dress getting on the horse, and he said rather pompously, he said, "Madam, rend your heart, not your garments." Graveyard memorials are very, very important because they carry obviously the important details of when somebody was born and when they died, but occasionally you can find that they detail a poignant story, and this one is such a good example. It records here the memory of Letitia and George, children of the Reverend David Griffiths, vicar of this parish, and they died in their infancy in 1791, but it's the poem in their memory that's significant. They tasted of life's bitter cup, refused to drink the poison up, but turned their little heads aside, disgusted with the taste, and died. And this stone cross commemorates the Reverend John Jones, who was perhaps better known by his bardic title of Tegid. And amongst his other achievements, he worked very closely with Lady Charlotte Guest of Merthyr Tydfil in translating the Mabinogi. And this area features very strongly in one of the stories when King Arthur and his knights cornered the famed and feared Twrch Trwyth, the wild boar. But to no avail, because it actually killed a couple of the knights and then broke free and ran off to the wilds of Mynydd Preseli. This is one of many places in Wales where there's a wonderful mixture of fact and fiction, and it's difficult to know what's what. And this tree is just about a perfect example because The bleeding of this ewe has been interpreted in so many different ways. Does it represent the blood of Christ at the crucifixion? Or does it bleed in memory of an innocent man hanged in error? Or it won't stop bleeding until a Welsh prince is once more installed in Nevern? Or it won't stop bleeding until world peace is achieved? Got a bit of a weight on that one, I think. Or if you want to be scientific, it won't stop until the sap stops flowing through the heartwood and then leaching out where the tree has been cut. This stone is proof of the link between Pembrokeshire and Ireland in the 5th and 6th centuries, because these marks along the edge of the stone are part of the ancient Irish language. By shining a light along the stones, we can see the highlights of these strokes above and below the corner of the stone. This is part of the Ogham alphabet. And this and the Latin inscription on the top here commemorate Maglclunus, son of Plutorius. And what's fascinating about this was that translating the Latin enabled the scholars to translate the Ogham alphabet. And there's this lovely cross stone which is carved with this ribbon pattern. It's an interesting one, something of an enigma, because not a lot is really known about its significance. Our churches are full of delightful secrets. Like, for instance, you can go through this door here, climb up some steps, and you'll find yourself in a room which is 27 feet by 12 feet, which at one time was used for living accommodation. And this really is a very special church, with architectural detailing that dates from the 14th to the 19th century, and is just so full of history. We've been focusing very much on the history of this church today, but this is a living church, and it's serving the community in the 21st century. And just a quick glimpse of this board which shows the donors to the Tower and Bells Fund in 2022. I mean, that bears witness to the kind of commitment shown by individuals towards this church, helping to repair and restore those bells that can now ring out after 125 years of silence. And I find this very heartwarming. I'm not quite sure what you call it. It's a prayer tree, but when you read the labels in conjunction with the dedications in the book, well, it makes me realize just how important these churches are to our sense of well-being, our sense of spirituality in the 21st century. It's always a pleasure to visit this church, because every time I come, I find something new. And it's only today I've realized that this ancient clapper bridge is actually on the site of an early ford which was part of the ancient trackway which leads across and ultimately up to Nevern Castle. This is a truly magical place, and every time I come and visit similar places, just makes me realise how fortunate I am to live in this wonderful country of Wales.